The quality of your life is determined by the quality of the questions that you ask God, yourself, and others. Full stop. End of sentence. I have never met someone that had a very quality-filled life that was not regularly asking questions of God themselves and of others. And so because we live in a world that's conditioned us toward answers, we've been taught to give the right answers, yet little attention is actually given to teaching people how to ask the right questions. So what I try to do is think of it like a big funnel. So at the beginning, what are questions? Why are they important? What do they do? Why are they powerful? And then actually work down the funnel to get a little bit more specific. So we talk about the questions that Jesus asked. Like, why did Jesus ask over 300 questions? Why was he asked over 180 questions, and yet he only directly answered 5 of them?
Well, welcome to another episode of Up Next. JR, here I am about to start, and I'm taking a sip of water, and I am choking a little bit, but it's good to have you as you're sitting in your home in Philadelphia.
Thanks for having me, Tommy. I'm really looking forward to this.
Yeah. For those who may not be familiar, I know we're going to talk a little bit about your book today. Tell me a little bit about what you do.
So I started an organization in 2011 called Kairos Partnerships. And it's an organization that helps leaders who are feeling ill-equipped or overwhelmed or lonely. And unfortunately, there are a lot of leaders feeling that. And so we want to come alongside of leaders and help them through coaching and consulting, speaking, writing, to equip them so they can lead with clarity and confidence and faithfulness. That's what we're called to. We see a lot of leaders start well. We don't see a lot of leaders end well. We want to change the narrative so leaders end well.
And why? How did you start this? I mean, what were you doing before all of this? Were you a pastor? Were you in the marketplace? What made you decide to start something like this?
This may sound a little strange, but in 6th grade, I felt a call to ministry. It's not many 6th graders say that, and by God's grace, I'm grateful for that. So I knew I'd be in ministry and thought I'd be a local church pastor my whole life. I certainly was that, did that, studied for that in college, and loved serving. I started out as a 20-somethings young adult pastor of a large church in Colorado Springs, did that for a while, came to the Philadelphia area, started at a large church, 20-somethings, young adult,
Yeah.
next gen organization or ministry. And we did that. And then God called me to plant a church. And we planted a church here in the Philadelphia area in 2008. And as we were doing that, as things were growing, we began to notice there were more and more leaders who were hurt that were coming to heal and recover in our church. And they would reach out and say, hey, I just need some help. Can you just ask questions and let me talk? And so as that began to grow, we began to see more and more leaders join us and come to us and say, Jared, would you help? And do you have any resources on this? And then other pastors began to tell other pastors who told other pastors. And as that began to grow, I went to our elders and I said, I want to pastor our church, but I also feel the need to
Yep.
pastor these pastors.
Yep.
And
Yep.
I was gripped by 3 questions: who leads the leader? Who shepherds the shepherd? Who pastors the pastor? And as that grew in me, I eventually went to our elders and said, a little bit tongue in cheek, but I was serious at the same time. I said, I think you should fire me from being the lead
Mm,
pastor of this church, not because I've done anything wrong or I don't want to be here. I'm doing this because I think that we've raised up other leaders who are great shepherds behind me. And there's this growing opportunity to care for those who are called to lead, especially faith leaders. And the elders, with smiles on their faces and tears in their eyes, said, I think you're right. So it then became a process of wanting to finish well and lead well and set up our new pastor in that. Ironically, we actually still worship at that church, even though I'm not on staff. And
very
so
good.
it is a
Very
chance
good.
for over the last several years to just love and support. And so Kairos Partnerships has grown over the years beyond just pastors and church planners to work with all sorts of leaders who are followers of Jesus, but lead others. And so it's attorneys and college presidents, Division I men's basketball coaches, entrepreneurs, Chick-fil-A operators. So
Yeah.
people who are following Jesus, but who are leading others. I have the privilege of having a front row seat to their life and their development.
Yeah. JR, have you ever heard the author Steve Cuss?
Yes, Steve. I know Steve. Yes.
You remind me of Steve. You guys seem to follow the same journey. Pastors in Colorado, from that point on, you started both working with leaders in certain areas.
Yes. Unfortunately, I don't have as cool of an accent as he does, but
So once you're done as a pastor, did you get to a point where all your life, or a good portion of your life, you were a pastor, and now you're sitting there day one. Okay, I got to start a ministry. I got to start an organization. I got to open a bank account. Did you sit there and say, what in the world did I get myself into?
Tommy, it's a great question. I'm a planner. Ironically, as I look back on this, none of this was planned, which is God's great irony, because some would say I'm one of the most purposeful, intentional people they've ever met. What I mean by that is I was just trying to add value to whomever was sitting in front of me. I was trying to care for and shepherd whoever was sitting in front of me. So I didn't set out and say, I'm going to start an organization and this will be the name. It simply began to grow and I didn't know what to do with it. And I thought, well, maybe we do this on the side. And as that grew, maybe I do this part time. And then maybe this develops into something full time. And so it just evolved over time. And looking back, I see God's fingerprints all over
Yeah,
it as
yeah,
if I had planned it, but I can take no credit because even this planner didn't have that foresight to see that happening. Even though I'm not, and people say to me, are you still a pastor? I get a little tongue tied because I'm not exactly sure how to answer that.
yeah,
In
yeah,
some ways, those outside the church, I have to explain it a little bit more when they ask
yeah,
that. But I
yeah,
still feel like I'm a pastor, but my congregation is decentralized all over the United States because so many of our coaching times and coaching sessions together are, a lot of times it's in prayer. What is the Lord saying to you in this? And how do you press into that? What does faithfulness look like here? How do you lead your family faithfully? How do we make sure that we're caring for ourselves? When is the last time you were engaged in solitude and silence? So, in many ways, I feel like my pastoral muscles and my instincts are still being used and worked, even though I don't have a congregation in the traditional sense in a local church setting.
yeah. My work is with young marketplace leaders in about 13 different global cities in the world. But I think back to my early days of ministry, it was in high school and college. JR, I was blessed to have the same group of student leaders from their sophomore year in high school to their graduating senior year in college. I felt like those were the David Shepherd years where I had to work out the kinks. I had to learn to work through all, and those guys were so patient with me. Like even during your years doing young adult ministry, you look back, how did that all prepare you to what you're doing now?
Yes, the idea that God loves us and uses us, even in our brokenness, to help other people experience wholeness in Christ is a mystery that continues to baffle me. And whether it's working with young adults or working with senior adults, working with youth, I just love that opportunity of being a bridge builder, of helping people see that. And one of the things I love to do is I love asking questions. I'm a professional question asker now, is how I describe myself as a coach and as a consultant. But it was really learning to ask those questions of God and of myself and realizing there was not only permission but an invitation to use this gift that I think that God has given all of us, but really seeing this as a very specific gift that I needed to steward and nurture that God's entrusted to me. I think I've been able to care for people well, yes, through my preaching and hospital visits and things like that, but it's caring for people and extending hospitality and generosity to others by asking thoughtful questions and being present. As Henry Nouwen says, giving people the ministry of presence.
Yeah, yeah,
That
yeah.
really prepared me well.
Yeah. And I feel like even hearing from you about your history is he put you in all of these different situations, bigger churches in Philadelphia and Colorado, starting your own church to learn how to exegete the community, how to figure out how do I work with these particular groups. Even though you're working with young adults, those in Philadelphia are very different from those in Colorado.
Yes, very much so. It was Karl Barth that said we should have our Bibles in one hand and a newspaper in the other. Now, younger adults may not know what a newspaper is, but it was like news on the screen printed on paper that you could read every day, was delivered to your house. And so I love that idea of having two come together. And so we take the word and the world and we clap our hands together, as Leonard Sweet says. And that requires us learning, and as you said, being a cultural exegete of exegeting the scriptures and exegeting the culture and looking for ways like Paul did, especially when I think about Acts 17 and Mars Hill, of bringing together these worlds in very important ways. That's what I love doing. I love doing that regardless of who I'm working with, what part of the country, even what part of the world they're in.
Yeah.
It's fascinating.
Jared, the one person who really taught me how to ask good questions, which leads us to our book, was this guy named Ray Bakke. And he was this professor. And Ray would bring me to different, like, I remember we went on a trip to Lima. And as we walked the street, he says, Tommy, here are the questions you should be asking. Always remember, God created the city, this culture before you were born. And he had a plan for this city. Now, as a student, what are the questions you need to be asking? What do you need to be observing? And he really laid that foundation, taught me well.
I love that. And I'm so glad you had that as a model, because the truth is, questions, I think most people know questions are important. We don't have many good models of those that ask really thoughtful questions. And I'm really grateful, Tommy, you had that opportunity of having a professor that taught you well. That's rare
Yeah.
and that's a gift.
And then also, I know we're going to talk about sports as well too. The one show I used to watch on ESPN all the time that I loved was Mike and Mike in the mornings.
Yes, yes. Golic and Greeny. Yes, you bet.
Golick and Greeny. I love. I kept. I said, why am I so fascinated by the show? They were always able to play off each other and ask good questions.
Yes, I agree. I agree.
Yeah, yeah. And so for you, a lot of times is here you are, you're building up this coaching, consulting, all of those different things. With your book a little bit, The Art of Asking Better Questions, how did this book come about?
It's been a long time coming. Questions have been a huge passion of mine for a long time. And I'm really grateful that I had that modeled well in my family. My parents asked good questions, especially my father. And I watched what my dad would do in asking thoughtful questions around the dinner table and the rich conversations we would have, the way he would engage with our neighbors or people in the hallway at church between services. And I thought, wow, this is really amazing the way and he worked for General Electric as a business manager, but he still was so good at being thoughtful and curious and wanting to connect and learn from others. And so that has always been something I've seen as a powerful force in my life because it was modeled well. But when I was studying for my DMin at Missio Seminary here in the Philadelphia area, I was challenged by my advisor, and he said, I'd be glad to be your advisor, but on one condition. And I said, sure, what is that? And he said, that you write about equipping leaders how to ask better questions for the sake of the kingdom.
Mm.
And I said, I'd love to do that. He said, you are passionate about this. This is a gift. And one day it's going to be a book. I want you to press in and research on it now, because this will be a book that will bless others. So he had a vision of that long before I did, and dug into the research on that, found some great research in the process, learned on that. And so for about the last 10 years, I've been listening, studying, researching, and just even in the last 3 or 4 years began to put it on paper and write it down.
Yeah, the one thing I loved is how your father, even when you were a young child, influenced you at the dinner table. And he gave you a vision of what could be, how he interacted with your neighbors, how he interacted with you guys. Because a lot of times, look, I have a Chinese parent. All they do is just sit there and tell you what you need to do and lecture you what you need to do, but you're helping people think through where they need to be going.
Yes. And that's one of the things we talk about in the book is when it comes to questions, questions are wonderful, but we have to take context into play, because there are cultural assumptions and expectations that go into it, where questions in some cultures would be absolutely expected, yet the same questions in another culture may be seen as disrespectful. And
Yeah,
so we've
yeah,
got
yeah,
to be very mindful of that as well. And so that was hard too. I tried to acknowledge that in the book, that we just need to be culturally aware and sensitive, because again, a good question asked with a good motive in one setting may be very appropriate, and in the other setting it might shut the conversation down rather than open it up.
yeah. I know in a little bit we're going to turn it around where you're going to ask me some questions and show us some of the things that you've done in your book. But talk to me about how you've broken down the book. What are some of the areas that you're covering?
So if you could summarize the whole book in one sentence, it would be this: the quality of your life is determined by the quality of the questions that you ask God, yourself, and others. Full stop. End of sentence. I have never met someone that had a very quality filled life that was not regularly asking questions of God themselves and of others. And so, because we live in a world that's conditioned us toward answers, we've been taught to give the right answers, yet little attention is actually given to teaching people how to ask the right questions. So, what I try to do is think of it like a big funnel. So, at the beginning, what are questions? Why are they important? what do they do? Why are they powerful? And then actually work down the funnel to get a little bit more specific. So we talk about the questions that Jesus asked. Like,
Mm,
why did Jesus ask over 300 questions? Why was he asked over 180 questions and yet he only directly answered 5 of them?
mm,
Which 5? Why those 5? Why didn't he answer more? And also the questions that God asks. There's a whole chapter on, if God knows everything, why would God ask questions? And there's a whole bunch of questions he asks. Then we talk about leadership and being the lead question asker rather than the lead answer giver, and how our paradigm of leadership needs to shift a little bit. But the last third of the book is, I tried to get ridiculously practical, that if people are convinced and say, I want to grow in asking better questions, but I don't know how, those 3 chapters of how to train and how to engage in practices before I have a conversation, things I can do during a conversation to ask better questions, and then thirdly, what can I do to evaluate or reflect upon after a conversation so I can grow in asking questions in the
yeah.
future. And then appendices and resources full of questions and other resources to equip those that are interested. So that's the structure, the arc of the book, to just help people say, I believe now the power of questions, and now I have opportunities to actually engage and grow in that powerful opportunity to be a better question asker.
Yeah, JR, for instance, a lot of times I'm 48 years old, and when I go into Jakarta, Indonesia, I'm working usually with the staff and leaders who are mid 20s to mid 30s. But Asians, especially with the Chinese, they're very, very respectful to elders. So
Mm-hmm.
as soon as I go there, they would just want to know what I want them to do. Just do it and we'll do it. But I've realized the key thing to develop them is not for me to sit there and just tell them, but is to ask questions to help them to think and figure it out. Is when you lead them on their journey, they're able to grow in confidence, but they're able to
Yes.
figure out what it means to own their city and their country.
Yes. And I'm so glad, Tommy, that you understand the power of questions and you're helping others experience
Yeah,
that too, because
yeah.
good questions are a gift that we can extend to other people. My brain thinks in word pictures. And so, they're like keys on a key ring that's capable of unlocking doors and opening new passageways. It's like a screwdriver that often pops the stuck lid of a can of paint open. It's like a flashlight that shows us where to go next, or archaeologist tools that we can use a trowel to uncover buried treasure. That's the power of questions. And it sounds like you really embrace that and then share that with others, which is terrific.
Now, the question I was going to ask you, how did you go about doing your research? Where did you go for your research?
Yeah. Well, I read dozens and dozens of books that were written on questions, on how do you ask a better question, everything from the business world to entrepreneurs to Silicon Valley to spiritual formation and spiritual directors to the business world, journalism. Maeutics is actually the study of studying questions, the formal academic, and even just diving into that, the Socratic method, Socrates. So everything from very recent all the way back to Socrates and everything in between. But then I didn't want it to just be theoretical. My DMin had to engage on a practical level. And so we identified several churches, and they actually went through a course that I developed, about 6-week course, where they actually engaged with questions that Jesus asked. We studied the questions of Jesus.
Interesting.
We got a red letter edition of our Bible, and we circled every red question mark we could find, and then said, why did Jesus ask this? Who did he ask it to? Where was he? And what happened after the conversation when he asked these questions?
But
And then
that
we
must have
just
been a fascinating discussion.
oh, it absolutely is fascinating. Absolutely. And then realizing, so we studied, theoretical, but also, and then actually had people identify where they were growing, identify their assumptions that keep them from asking other questions, those barriers, and then being able to overcome some of those barriers and grow in their question asking.
Wonderful. Side note, which question to this day are you fascinated in terms of the question that Jesus asked?
There are so many, but I think my favorite question of all is when he asked at the end of Mark 8, who do you say that I am? And the reason why I love that isn't just that he asked it, it's that he set it up before he asked it, geographically and conversationally. So, just a little context here, Tommy, if I may, Jesus, Jerusalem was monotheistic, right? They follow Yahweh, Yahweh only. The Jews followed God, and they would worship in the temple. Jesus could have asked that question, who do you say that I am in the temple? But it says that they were going to Caesarea Philippi, or Banyas, which is in the north. That is a place that is very Greek, is very pagan. And scholars have said that at the time, there's one scholar that said there were more idols and gods in the city than there were people. So he goes to a pagan area. And if you go there today in Caesarea Philippi, there's a huge rock scarp. And on the rock scarp, it has little niches. And inside the niches were where idols and little gods and shrines were. This huge, and this is what it was known for. It says that Jesus and his disciples were traveling to Caesarea Philippi on the way to this pagan city, leaving Jerusalem. And he begins to have a conversation with them and says, who do you say, or who do others say that I am? A prophet. Some people say you're Elijah. Some people, and then he just tightens it and he squeezes it even more. Okay, that's great. Thank you for that straw opinion poll. What about you? Who do you say that I am? Jesus is so brilliant with his questions, not only to set up the question, to get to the real question, but he even thinks through where he asks the question.
Got it.
And that is what we miss. But if you study the questions of Jesus, you begin to see just how brilliant Jesus actually was.
Yeah. Why do you think he asked those guys that question?
Jesus asked lots of questions for lots of reasons. Sometimes it was for rebuking. Sometimes it was highlighting or challenging. Other times it was for connecting. I think in that case, he wanted to clarify, to zone in, to say, okay, I know. I mean, he knew, right? He's 100% man, 100% God.
Yeah.
But he needed to know that they knew. He needed them to vocalize it. And Peter's the one that says, you are the Christ. What's fascinating, if you look at how the book of Mark is structured, it's like a giant pyramid. So the first 8 chapters of the book is all about life. Follow Jesus' life, healing, joy. Then it gets to 16 chapters, the end of chapter 8, right in the middle. The apex of that is that story. The whole book of Mark hinges on that story. From that moment on, Jesus says, it's about death. It's about suffering. Now that you follow me, you're going to slide in the direction of dying to yourself and experiencing suffering and death. So it's life. Peek at that question, who do you say that I am? And then death the whole way down. And that whole book is centered around that one question.
Interesting. Fascinating. I loved it. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah. What about you, Tommy? Do you have a question or two that pops out to you that are favorites of Jesus, or favorite questions Jesus asked?
John chapter 3. Give me 1 minute here. Let me read this one. Let me read that question. Sorry about that.
Oh, no worries. I know I put you on the spot there a little bit.
It's the question where Nicodemus says to him is, how can the part where he just doesn't understand who Jesus is, right? And Jesus begins to say, for God so loved the world. The one part that was very fascinating about it, JR, is that John chapter 3, he says it to Nicodemus, who comes to him and says, hey, is this who you are supposed to be? And then Jesus says to him, for God so loved the world. But it is after 4, 5, 6, and 7 that John begins to paint the very fact that Jesus and Samaritan woman, Jesus and a Gentile official, Jesus and the invalid at the pool, Jesus and the feeding of the 5,000. Is John using, because in John chapter 1, he tells us who Jesus is. Way beginning in time, he's completely different from all the other gospel writers. But then chapter 3 shows us exactly what it means to love the world. But he says it to a member of the Pharisee in the Sanhedrin.
I love it. And in the book of John, what's interesting is that, John was written so that people would come to know Christ. So he's expecting that people would read his letter who weren't quite sure about Jesus. John has this really cool thing in the original language where he'll ask a question and put what are called tags at the end. So things like the woman at the well, when she runs into town. The well.
Yes.
Right? She runs into town and says, is this the Messiah? Could this be the Messiah? Could it be? Might it be? And so there's all these little tags like, is this true? And so he just very keenly and very strategically, the way he shapes his questions with these little tags at the end, leaves a little bit of openness of wondering, is this true or not? That forces us as the reader to ask, yeah, is that true? And I just love the style of the questions. There are multiple questions like that in the book of John, and some of the ones you highlighted as well, those tags that he includes on the end.
Yeah. JR, can we flip it around a little bit? I'd love to hear
Yes.
your ability to ask some of the questions as you and I dialogue.
Yes, for sure. I mean, one of the things, Tommy, that I'm really encouraged about is the way you talked about in your particular culture and growing up that maybe question asking wasn't valued like it might be with some other cultures. You said it was modeled for you at this trip to Lima with your professor. What are some of the shifts that made you fall in love with questions when culturally maybe that wasn't something instilled in you? When did you discover the power of questions, and why are you still convinced they're powerful?
I would probably say is right when I was at WashU, there was a staff worker named Susie Gathered. She was my university staff worker, and I loved her so much. But she probably was the first model of asking questions constantly with her students, never telling us what to do. This was very different from growing up in the Asian church, from growing up in the Asian parents. And so it made me sit there and wonder, how did this person who is older than all of us, who's supposed to guide us, but constantly asking questions all the time? And that really started me on that journey of following leadership.
And where do you think Susie learned that?
I bet you a lot of times that whole culture of InterVarsity. One of the things I've noticed, what your book is written by InterVarsity Press, but all of the different staff workers that I met. Greg Howe was our founding chairman. I have gotten to know their president, Alan Kill, back in the day. One of the things that I love about Alan Kill is I remember sitting with a group of people, and there was about 12 people there. Usually, if it's a president, he would sit there and just tell them what he did a very good job of making sure those 12 people felt like they were the most important people in the room. And he was able to ask them questions. And just watching that DNA really allowed me to learn through some of those things.
That's fascinating. That's fascinating. Tommy, what have been some of the most important or significant questions others have asked you in your lifetime?
My seminary professor, right before I graduated from seminary, Dr. Julius Walloy Singh. And he says, Tommy, you're very good at going, doing. What is it that you think you're not very good at? And that really made me, he says, and then he says, if you think about that, what is it that you're going to do to take the gospel to the ends of the earth? And the one thing that led me on a journey, I wasn't good at reflecting. I'm always looking ahead. I'm not very good at reflecting. And so I had to learn how to reflect and ask key questions in my own heart. Why am I thinking like this? Why am I so insecure? Why do I think about why am I such a people pleaser? All of those things that led me on a journey. But it started with that one question that professor asked me.
Yeah, that's fantastic. That's fantastic. You know, you've been doing this podcast for a long time. I host a podcast too, and it's a ton of work, more than people realize. So I'm curious, what motivated you to start it, and what motivates you still to keep it going, knowing it's a lot of work?
The journey. I love the journey. Like you and I have this unique journey. JR, you have a unique journey. How you got to this particular point, people ask me what my journey is, or other people. You're always listening on that journey because it's so unique. How did you get here? What were the failures that you still remember? What were the failures that you learned? What were the successes? Who were the influences on your life? All of those different things. And so I actually love hearing that journey. And in some sense, the whole UpNext podcast becomes just a reflection on that journey.
That's great. So the late leadership guru, Peter Drucker, you know, the expert, he said the leader of the past may have been the one who knew how to tell, but the leader of the future will be the one who knows how to ask. You're working with lots of 20 and 30 something young leaders who a lot of people might say they're the future of the church. I like to call them the present of the church, right? They're not in the future right now, but
Yeah.
future leaders down the road. What would you want to say to them regarding questions and being future leaders, especially off of what Drucker said of the leader of the future will be the person who knows how to ask? What
Yeah.
advice or encouragement or pastoral challenge would you have for your listeners?
Learn to ask yourself tough questions. Learn to sit there and ask yourself to learn how to reflect and ask yourself internal questions. For instance, here's a good example. I tend to work really hard, but yet at the same time, when I don't work hard or I stop working, I feel guilty. One of the questions I've had to ask myself is, why am I feel guilty when I stop working? What
Mm,
is driving me that causes me to work all the time? What is it that I'm not seeing in my life? Working hard is great, and I wear it like this badge of courage. But when I'm not working, I feel guilty. Is something that's driving me that's not healthy.
That's that takes a lot of courage. One of the things I talk about in the book that of one of the four essential elements of asking great questions is the courage. I think that's a big reason why people don't ask a lot of questions is they're afraid of the answer.
Yeah,
If they ask themselves that, because that could have scary implications. They're also afraid, oh, I might offend someone, make it awkward. I don't know what to say. What would you say to some of your listeners, the young competent kingdom leaders around the world that are listening about courage and question asking, of those questions of asking them ourselves? What would you want to say about courage?
that we are all on a journey and that we're all messed up and that we have baggage in all of our lives. But that's what grace was. Grace rescued us from it. God rescued us and gave us hope. And so, as a part of us being redeemed, we have to ask those questions. We have to dig deep because what is inside of us will eventually come out. And if you don't ask those questions now and deal with it now, your kids, your spouse, and your friends will have to deal with the ramifications of all those things.
That's powerful. That's powerful. What are the questions that you have never questions you've never been asked by someone, but you really wish they would?
I think some of them is what are some of the biggest lessons in your life, or in turn, what are some of the pain points in your life? Looking back, what is one grave mistake that you made that you wish you could do over? What are the insecurities? So those are some of the questions that I think a lot of times people are afraid to ask. But I'm sitting there, hey, people want to know, so feel free to ask those questions.
That's great. That's great. What's your dream of those who listen to this podcast?
That the light bulb will go on and that you realize you yourself are on a journey, and that as you listen to different people, you're sitting there asking yourself the same questions. That my dream for this podcast and for Resource Global is the light bulb goes on. Lord, you have given me a journey. You have given me a path. You have called me something unique. And so let me begin that journey by asking those hard questions of what you've been doing and sharing and shaping into my life.
Tommy, you've used the word journey a lot. I know that's close to your heart and a passion of yours. Why is the idea and the concept of journey so important to you? And why is that a passion you have to pass that passion of journey on to others?
Because JR, I look back at my life and here I am, and people look at it and says, oh, you're in 13 different global cities. Wow, you're working about 30, 40 employees. Wow, you must be great. Do you not realize that I was born in an immigrant family? I was born as one of five Chinese students here in this neighborhood. I spent my early childhood running away from bullies wanting to beat me up purely because of who I was. Then
Mm,
from that point on, I grew up in anger because I wasn't the smartest kid in the world. I wasn't the most popular kid in the world. I had so much insecurity and so much anger within me. And then from that point on, that anger went to the church where I was really good at what I did. But pretty soon that turned into a bad thing because I did things merely because I wanted people to say good things about me. I'm
mm.
serving in the church, but I wanted people to say good things about me.
So, your own journey being impacted, you want to make sure that other people know that their journeys matter.
Yeah, 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 yeah. And if you reflect upon that journey, you will see God has always been working throughout your life, and you've
Mm,
prepared me to where I am now. Like, for
yeah,
instance, JR, I could sit there and say, I could build an organization around not me, the founder, but around voices of all over the world because it was the journey that allowed me to be secure in who I was.
that's great. That's great. What do you think are one of the top few questions you've ever asked someone else?
I think it's the one is what is one mistake that you look back that you wish you could change in your life that
Mm,
really still influences you to this day?
that's great. That's
What would it
great.
be for you, JR?
Well, it's hard to pick just one because I always love to have in my back pocket a list of questions, metaphorically in my back pocket that I can ask with leaders I'm coaching, or I can ask children, or I could ask those at a party or a cookout in a backyard. So I think it depends so much on context. I think that's where I think that surprised me the most is the importance of wisdom and knowing the context of the types of questions. But I often like to ask people, just as a conversation starter, on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 is low, 5 is okay, 10 is really high. Where are you on your passion meter when it comes to your job?
Mm,
And then whatever the number is, let's say they give a 6 out of 10. I'll say, okay, what would it take for you to see that rise to a 7 or an 8 out of 10 on the scale? What would have to happen? And then I like to ask, okay, so if someone paid you a fair salary, what would be a job or what would be some jobs that would be a 10 for you? What I'm
God,
basically getting at is their passion. When you
yeah,
get people talking about their passions, man, they really open up, and it's amazing what you can learn.
yeah. Very, very good. And now, growing up, your kids always say, "Dad, why are you asking so many questions all the time?"
Yes, hopefully not too many. And there have been times where I probably have asked too many. Questions are amazing and powerful, but they do have their limits. But I do love asking questions. In fact, it's been very important to instill that in our children. We have two sons. One's a freshman in college, the other is a sophomore in high school. But when they were little, we would lay awake at night and turn the lights out when I was saying, tucking them in and saying goodnight and saying prayers, where we called it question of the night, where I
Yeah,
would just lay in bed and say, before I leave, you ask me one question and I'll ask you one question.
that's a
And it
great
could
thing.
be whatever they want. I mean, they were 4, 5, 6 years old, and it could be, what's your favorite ice cream color? Or what does God look like? Or, I mean, it's just amazing what can pop in the head of a 6 or 7 year old. And so I tried to instill that. And sometimes at dinner, we'd say, what's the best question you asked yourself or other people today?
Very good.
And just
Very,
to
very,
try to
very.
instill that at a young age, just like it was instilled at a young age for me.
Yeah. Hey, I know we don't have too much time left, and I'm hoping this will be the beginning of a future conversation here, JR. And I would love to see you in Nairobi or Cape Town or Johannesburg and all of those things. I would love for you to be part of our Resource Global cohort in a few years or in the next year or so.
Yeah, I love serving leaders all over the place, and if I can serve, let's talk. That'd be great.
Can we talk about sports real fast?
Let's do it. Yeah, that'd be great.
You live in Philadelphia. What's your favorite sports team?
We're big baseball fans, so Philadelphia Phillies, and they're doing really well right now. Looks like they're on their way to clinching the NL East, which is really exciting. But we also do love the Eagles, and we cheer for the Eagles. As I mentioned before we press record, I have a hard time describing myself as an Eagles fan because I don't want to be clumped into a lot of the unwise knuckleheads that do crazy things at Eagles games. But we do like our Eagles here, especially after a Super Bowl win.
Got it. Now, are you a big 76ers fan as well, too, with NBA basketball?
I love basketball, but I actually love college basketball more. I grew up in
Mm,
Charlottesville, Virginia, so we cheered for UVA and the
yeah,
ACC basketball. NBA, not so much. I've been to some Sixers games. They're great, but to me, the NBA style, I'm actually more attracted to the college game.
yeah. Honestly, JR, this was last year was my first year watching NCAA college basketball. I grew to love it. I really enjoyed it a lot.
Yes, I absolutely love it, especially March Madness. That opening
Yes.
weekend of the tournament, I actually
Yeah.
take time off so I can watch the games and really get into it with my family. It helps too, just growing up around the game, went to Duke basketball camp as a kid and got to be around a lot of the great Duke players that won the national championship. Again, being at the University of Virginia, growing up in town, going to a bunch of their games. And I've had the privilege of coaching some leaders who are Division I men's basketball coaches now, and getting to see the inner workings of what it's like to be a leader on the inside of a Division I program. So that's why it's gotten in my blood at a young age. And I still, they're definitely better athletes in the NBA, but I just think it's a better overall product in college. I love college basketball.
And talk to me about Michigan Wolverines football.
Yes, big fan, big Michigan Wolverines fan. And obviously, it was wonderful a few years ago with the national championship and getting to celebrate that with my family. Yeah, my wife grew up just outside of Ann Arbor. Before we met in college, I went with my college roommate who was from Michigan to a game one Saturday afternoon. And it was love at first sight being at the big house there, the largest stadium in North America, winning this program in college football, greatest fight song, the wing-backed helmets. Man, I was in. It was love at first sight, and I haven't looked back since.
Very, very good. And JR, as we wrap up, if people want to find you, want to text you, LinkedIn, are you on LinkedIn? Are you on Instagram, website, all of that?
Yeah, I'm on LinkedIn and I'm on Facebook and Twitter. Our organization, Kairos Partnerships, is on Instagram. Easiest way to find us, jrbriggs.com or kairospartnerships.org. That's KAIROS partnerships.org. They can also find the book anywhere where good books are sold. Yeah, I'd love to stay in touch with your audience. Blessings. Thank you for the opportunity, Tommy.